Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, How to Develop a COVID-19 Safety Plan. I'd like to introduce Desi Whitney, co-founder of and president of Emergency Concierge International. Desi and I have been both working very closely on two of Prevue's own 2020 events. Our Best Practices Summit, which will take place May 10th to 11th, at the Marriott at Legacy Place in Plano, Texas, and Meetwell, which is now scheduled for September 8th to 9th at the Wigwam in Phoenix. So we've been spending a lot of time together, and I look forward to introducing her to you this afternoon. I welcome your questions throughout the presentation. You do not have to wait. You can enter them directly into your console. There's also a white paper that Desi has painstakingly put together with a lot of tips for your next safe meeting, and that is downloadable right from your console as well. I want to, last but not least, thank today's sponsors, Kiowa Island Golf Resort, MGM Resorts, Visit Alexandria, and Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Why don't we move over to you, Desi, and you can kick off with our first poll question so we can take the pulse of the room.
Yes, absolutely, Barbara. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I think that you'll feel my enthusiasm and my caffeination probably through the webinar. And yeah, it's a great day here in Tempe, Arizona. It's a little bit cloudy, which we're excited for because we get a lot of sunshine. So a little change is good. I know if you're on the, let's see, the East Coast or Midwest, you probably don't want to hear about that. So I won't go too much into detail, but as we're kind of getting started, we're seeing that the attendee count is still climbing. We want to ask a question to kind of get a kind of a baseline for where you are all at as meetings start to move forward this year in 2021. So if you could please put the poll question up, which is, have you planned a live meeting with COVID protocols? So that would be anytime in 2020 and anytime in 2021. So have you planned a live meeting with COVID protocols? We'll give you a minute to answer that, yes or no. We appreciate your feedback. Let's see here. I know we're going to give it a little bit of time.
Curious.
No. Okay. Yeah. Do we know how many have participated based on the attendee count in this? Is that something you see on your back end?
Yeah, it's we're around 400 people. So
okay, that's awesome. I mean, that's great information. So, all right, so 78% of you all have not planned a live meeting with COVID protocols, and we speculated that this would really be kind of like the answer in the direction that you would respond in that manner. And so it's just a reminder of why you're all here and the information that we're going to cover today and how relevant it is. So let me adjust my screen here. It changed things a little with the polling, but just a little quick background about myself and ECI, Emergency Concierge International. It's a mouthful, right? So ECI is a little easier. But I'm Desi Whitney, and I have been in the hospitality industry for 19 years. And I know I look young, I'm well preserved, but I actually started in hospitality 19 years ago. So it's been a wild ride. Obviously, what we're seeing in the past year is the most wild thing I have seen, certainly in my lifetime, and has given us an opportunity to adapt and grow and figure out what life looks like as we are moving forward. And from a background perspective, ECI actually started in 2017 as an all hazards emergency management and planning company. And that's really focused on the all hazards side, which always has included infectious disease response. And then now, of course, we have really, delved into providing resources for you as planners and hotels and venues and TMCs and destinations on new considerations as we're moving forward to produce these safe meetings. And so that's what we're going to talk about, today. And we've got this white paper available for you as a resource. It's called How to Develop a COVID-19 Safety Plan, and it's available under handouts in the webinizer pop-up screen. So
just to put it all together, I approached Desi in 2020, early in 2020, when we were looking at a meeting in Texas. Moved it to the fall, and have been, once again, we are now in May, May 10th and 11th in Plano, Texas. Very excited now, really moving forward. So we will talk about that meeting. We will talk about another meeting we had scheduled for March with Prevue, our Visionary Summit, which we do with the Incentive Research Foundation, and that is called Meet Well. And we are now, we moved that from March to September and are heavily into planning that as well. So why don't we see what people are doing for the rest of 2021? Do you want to put up that second poll question?
Sure. Are you planning? Oh, go ahead.
Are you planning live meetings in 2021? So we'd be curious to see if people are in our shoes and planning for the third and fourth quarter. Yes or no? Okay.
Yes.
Great news.
Right.
Great news. 76% is a significant number. So it sounds like the industry's ready to go with the vaccinations, and you know, people are planning to move forward. So great news.
It's exciting. It really is. And I know everybody, you know, myself included, very excited to get out and travel and want to attend meetings and have that experience of interacting and networking and all of the wonderful things that happen when we meet face to face. And so how do we do that safely, right? Because we still have this pandemic. We're still kind of waiting for this vaccine thing to play out, right? And there are a lot of new things to consider when you are planning a meeting. And so we're kind of going to go in a this will be a little bit fun today. So this is kind of like geared towards the planner perspective, but it will benefit anybody, a venue, a DMC, a DMO, kind of put that hat on and think about the same questions and protocols that we're covering and how you can execute those maybe in your facility. And we, just like Barbara was saying, all of you have had the opportunity of lifting and shifting all of your programs, right? So we had the same experience, and I teased Barbara that we were going to be best friends by the end of all this stuff, because when you're planning a meeting with someone, it's very intricate, and a lot of conversations that happen, and we had some fun. And then of course it's a little bit sad when things have to get postponed, and it's just where we are right now. But we still had a lot of great experiences and learning and questions and all of that. So we'll talk a lot about our experiences for both programs and things that we considered.
Good. You want to start with the the initial planning process?
Yes, I sure do. So pardon me, I've got kind of allergies going on today, so I'm going to drink a little bit of water, and I've got my tea with my motivational cup here. So so one of the things, and if you refer later on to the white paper, we kind of start with the foundation. We call this like your buy-in from stakeholders and your pre-event registration process, which Barbara already had figured out. Obviously that makes it pretty easy to move forward. And Prevue's perspective was, and you would correct me certainly if I'm wrong, Barbara, we are moving forward. We are going to have these programs, and we want to do it in the most safe way possible, like the most cautious, protective little bubble that we can create within the resources that we have available. Would you say that's about accurate?
Yeah, well, and in fact, we put more pressure on ourselves because the summit in May is called the Best Practices Summit. So our goal is to be a model for how to move forward with this white paper, with our actual experience. We're going out and speaking in the industry about what we do at that meeting. So, and we're doing a session at the meeting. Desi and I will be doing a session on the prep for this meeting. So, at this point, there's no room for error. We really got it very seriously. Vaccine, no vaccine, we are nowhere near where we were as far as planning. We need all the help we can get, and I just thought it was best to bring in an expert.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that. And that's a great, segue to the new protocols and different things to consider. And so when we talk about kind of like laying the foundation in your buy-in process and really defining and deciding in advance how it is that you're going to approach that based on your attendees, based on your company or your organization's, risk tolerance. And what was great for Barbara is she was able to advertise a relationship with a company like ECI and say, okay, we've called in the experts and here's what we're doing. And then we're able to provide, communication recommendations that you really want to look at as an attendee. What do I want to hear from you as a meeting organizer that you're doing to keep me safe so I feel comfortable attending your conference? And so defining what your COVID protocols are first, and then communicating them to your attendees so that they know what to expect. How are you going to enforce masks and distancing, and to what level in both of those things? And some people may decide not to attend your conference, for example, if you're, requiring masks 100% of the time. And so I think that communicating your expectations to everybody in advance is going to be very significant to have them make the decision that is, right for them.
And that's all on the website, as well as the individual hotels protocols. We're obviously working with the Marriott, so there's a company-wide document, but there's also an individual hotel document about what they're doing at that property. A lot of people have suggested, and I want to do this for our attendees when we get closer to the date, to do a Zoom call for those who have questions, so that they're able to meet ECI and me and ask any questions they might have up front.
Absolutely, which is great and interactive. And I think everybody appreciates that, because if you haven't attended a meeting yet, it looks and it feels a little different. So let's talk about, putting out our expectations, and something that meeting organizers will want to consider as you do move forward is putting forth some kind of attendee accountability agreement and making everybody very, very, very well aware ahead of the process before they register what your protocols are going to look like and what they need to adhere to in order to participate. And, something that might get a little uncomfortable, but you've got to consider, we didn't necessarily, we're not going to kick anyone out from a Prevue, meeting, but if you're meeting organizer, will you, is it 3 strikes you're out if you fail to comply? Really setting forth what that compliance looks like and to what level are you going to enforce it. So that's just a little bit about kind of your, let's say, buy-in process and kind of pre-event registration process.
You want to tell them a few things that are included in an attendee agreement?
I would love to. So things that I would include are, if you are going to conduct a health questionnaire, kind of health screening process, making sure that they understand that and that they're agreeing that they will comply, with honesty if they're answering questions, related to their activity and symptoms and that sort of thing. That I, agree and understand that I might need to wear my mask 100% of the time if that's the direction that you are choosing as the meeting organizer, that you will do your best to maintain social distancing, that you will follow protocols, and that you also understand if I don't, here is, the potential repercussion. For starters, right? There's plenty more to go into, and you really have to work with your leadership team and your planning staff to decide how it is that you want to move forward and what your expectations are going to be.
Let's touch on the other early stage document for the attendees is the liability waiver. So
yeah.
Do you have anything to suggest as far as that's concerned? We are going to be distributing them to all the attendees, and basically you can't attend the event if I don't have a signed copy return.
Yeah, absolutely. Protection for your organization is super important. And, it's kind of a scary world out there right now. And so I always put the disclaimer out that we are not lawyers, where you can't operate in a legal capacity, which I shared, of course, with you as well, Barbara. But I think that including And, a liability waiver is definitely, top on the list. Get, your legal counsel to weigh in on that. But I think that you also want to focus on making sure that it's a holistic liability waiver, not just COVID. Certainly there should be a COVID component, but you should look at all other things, that could be potentially hazardous at a program.
Do you have any suggestions as to where people can start looking for this kind of document?
Yes, I do. Okay, let me think about this. I have a resource, Barbara, that I read through. I think it was PCMA, and I wonder if I can find the link while we're on this call. I'll see if I can do that for you. But there are some, really great pieces of information from meeting focused lawyers that would be great to incorporate in that. But then I think you also, it can't be cookie cutter, and you've really got to make sure that you get your legal counsel involved, because what's your risk tolerance as an organization, and making sure that you're being protected that way. So I'll see if I can find that while we're kind of chatting through all this stuff.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so do you want to move on to the on-site registration? We've got our attendee agreement, our liability waiver. People have traveled. We're on site. We're meeting them for the first time. How is that going to go?
Absolutely. And I also want to just kind of backtrack and say, when you download that COVID-19 safety plan, all of these considerations and more are in there. So definitely download that when we're done, and make sure that you kind of look through the different things and see what applies to your particular meeting. And it's going to give you a start on your COVID safety plan. It is not necessarily an end all be all, because things are not cookie cutter, but very thought provoking processes and things to consider. So when you are kind of going through your planning process, including like agenda review, obviously really planning out your on-site registration process. And so, okay, your attendees are getting there for the first time. Maybe this is the first time they've attended a live event, which is very exciting. What does that plan look like, and making sure that everyone is on the same page. And of course, it's going to start with your planning staff and making sure they're totally up to speed as to what the flow is going to look like. I think that in the spirit of communication, having a greeter and people that are there to kind of advise and direct traffic, and also be kind of that reminding force of, it's kind of like your intro to protocol, like, hey, awesome, welcome. Let's make sure we keep our masks on, and here's how the flow is going to be. We're going to take you through the health screening process over here, and then when you get done, we'll have you pop over to registration, and then we'll get you settled, in the meeting space, or whatever applies to your agenda. But I think that that's an important thing to consider. And then, flow management is a lot of what all of this is about. And so when you're looking at, okay, I'm going to do a health screening, and maybe that includes, your waiver, or you're signing something, or maybe it's a digital thing. There's lots of new technologies out there, and maybe there's a temperature check process. Our recommendation is that it's in a separate space other than the registration area if possible. And then of course, the popular thing right now is to provide a sticker for people that have gone through the protocol process or the health screening, and so they're approved for entry, and really making sure that you pay attention to that. And here's the kind of the caveat to that. Most people are going to pass the temperature screening. Everybody's doing this. They're going to go through that questionnaire process. And so, I think that the direction moving forward is that we're paying attention to our symptoms and how we're feeling. And sometimes we need a reminder of, gosh, you know what, maybe I'm not feeling so great. And so those questionnaires and health screenings are a great kind of foundation on just reminding us to pay attention to what our bodies are doing, and also to think about others. And if you are not feeling well, you shouldn't be around other people, regardless of whether it's COVID or flu, right? It doesn't, either way, you want to make sure that you're protecting the people that are around you. So really, you want to be thoughtful about how you're going to execute it, and think about the number of people that you're moving through a space. How long is it going to take? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from elevators? Are they coming from, they're coming straight in from, the bus or their transportation, and just kind of think about your flow and process in that regard. Let's see. So we had talked about, going through and having people check in first, do the health screening in one door, out the other. and then stop at the registration desk, which would be outside this particular meeting space. And this is a fairly small meeting, like 50 people, right, for context. And then have you or your registration staff, let people, go in and deciding whether you're going to do assigned seats, which we had talked about that as certainly a precaution, and also really managing flow and making sure that you have space for 25 to 50 people to be able to line up if it starts to bottleneck, and where are people going to overflow to. So those are some things that you definitely want to consider.
And just to clarify, we have this room that we've made available, and this is every day of the meeting. They will participate in this. We have a question regarding vaccines and requiring vaccines. And, that is something that's obviously brand new. And so we haven't had that experience. There are many initiatives out there right now. IATA is looking at a vaccine program across the US. I think, a few months down the line, certainly during the summer, there will be a lot more movement toward a vaccine passport. But right now, for us and our purposes, that's not in the cards.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. I agree. There's still a lot of information to learn and to be shared about those. So we will adjust accordingly, right? We're all in this evolution together.
Even for our September meeting than it is for the May one.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Let's see. There was one other point that I wanted to add, which is, of course, having a screening room separate than the registration area if you've got space is awesome. And then having an additional space for additional consultation for anybody reporting COVID-like symptoms is a great opportunity as well, because now you want to look at things like isolation and decontamination and making sure that you're keeping everybody safe at your, at your program.
And ECI is providing a gentleman who will be on, he's a trained EMT, who will be on call 24/7. So that was another reason that we decided to go with, with the experts, because as a smaller meeting with a smaller meeting staff, we don't have the ability to be able to address, if God forbid there is a critical issue. Got to have an expert there to do that, and work with the hotel to obviously the first step is to bring them to an isolated space and to either get them to a hospital or to home, back home. So how exactly do you execute that? So we just decided that we would put that in the hands of your EMT.
Yes, absolutely. And so this particular gentleman is actually a paramedic, but we also have EMTs. EMTs is kind of like the baseline, and then paramedic, of course, even better. And then in addition to the COVID, protocols and response, we have, he would be like, we call it boots on the ground service. And so in addition to COVID response, like you said, available 24/7 for all emergencies. And he, depending on the venue, is coming forth with a full scale emergency plan on, if X happens, Barbara, we're doing Y. You say, okay, his name's Brian, for example. All right, Brian, what are we doing? Tell us what to do if XYZ emergency is happening. And it's a wonderful addition, because it takes the stress off of you, for example. And that's a big stressor. You're like, I am so busy. I've got so much to do on my plate with executing this meeting. And if this happens, do I have the staff to facilitate the process? And what does that look like? We'll talk a little bit more about kind of your COVID response a little bit later, but that is a great mention. Thank you for that.
So we're moving into the meeting room itself. Do you want to talk about how we're planning to assign seats and meals at the seats and so forth?
Yeah, there's a ton of different things to consider, and it depends on the size of your meeting, but I recommend, looking at the general layout of the hotel. And so when we first started talking, for example, it was like, okay, I need to see the layout of the hotel, not just the meeting space that we're in, but the total meeting space. And then if there are any other groups in house, we definitely need to know that, because we want to see if there's going to be any crossover. And then, of course, looking at what space you're in and making sure that it is big enough to accommodate the appropriate space protocols, and then coming up with creative solutions for that, and for flow management, for defining entry doors, exit doors, keeping people reminded that they should keep their distance, and kind of give everybody space. Reviewing, all of the diagrams for logistics and flow. We're calling it, of course, ingress and egress. We talked a little bit a minute ago about, okay, how many guest rooms are there? Is everybody coming from elevators? What's the elevator capacity? What it should be to be appropriately distanced, and how long is it going to take that number of people to get down, elevators? And, we had talked about obviously using outdoor functions wherever possible, right? The luncheon by the pool, maybe even going for a walk outside and kind of keeping everybody spaced out so you can get a little breath and some breathing room. And, something you consider in terms of like a touchless, registration process, you could preset badges, that have been thoughtfully procured and executed, right? So you'd want to say, okay, everyone's sanitizing before the registration staff is touching and facilitating this process. And maybe you do assigned seats, and maybe you have their registration badge already at their table. And so it makes it.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we're planning to do. It just takes a lot of the, being right in front of someone else out of the equation. So it is
Yeah.
at this point in time, and again, I'm referring to our May meeting, we are not where we were. So we can't execute our meeting as we had. And I think that we really looked at that throughout every step. So yes, people will have their their meetings material already at their assigned seat. They will spend the entire time at the assigned seat, and including their meals, and be carefully moved in and out of the room so there's no queue. So
yeah, absolutely. And we also talked about, you've got your one-on-one appointments, which is super important for your suppliers and for your planners, obviously, and some different ways that we explored to execute that. A 6-foot table across from each other, still masked, is very appropriate. Another option is, the acrylic, which, you can explore that. And we talked about, acrylic sneeze guards. One of your hotels had those already procured for their bars. And, you talked about borrowing them for your registration desk, which is important too, because you want to keep your registration staff safe. And so looking at all of those different ways that you can kind of create an additional barrier with your attendees.
right. And just to share a little bit more about people, so people understand the Prevue format, these one-on-one appointments that we do, it's a meet and greet 7-minute appointment, and the on the beginning of the first day of the meeting, at the end of the second day of this 2-day meeting, half of the 30 planner attendees get to sit for several minutes with each sponsor. So we used to be fairly random about where we placed the tables. People could move around the room, passing each other. Now it's going to be basically like a straight across the room, so that you're basically moving from one appointment to the next without all this crisscross. I mean, you've even got to think of that. There are people who are not going to be comfortable, every 7 minutes moving through other people. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've seen a lot of the arrows on the ground. You've seen that certainly in, meetings and grocery stores. And if this is a meeting that you're attending for the first time, all of these protocols are going to look a little bit strange and different and new. And so when you walk into a space, you're kind of being defined and told exactly where to go. And, it's a little bit, you really have to pay attention as an attendee, which is, it's good, it's just a matter of, okay, let's remind everybody exactly what that looks like. One thing that we had talked about were, the restroom situation. So your attendees for these programs are primarily female. And so we had talked about, looking at the restroom capacity, and of course, when you break, what that looks like and how many people are going to be needing to facilitate that process. And so one creative solution that Barbara had come up with was defining one of the gentlemen's rooms as a lady room. And so, if you've got a small portion of your attendees being, utilizing the men's room, then that became a really great creative solution. So that way we could keep everybody spaced appropriately. So I want to talk a little bit about, food and beverage. So we had brainstormed quite a bit with your venues, and what is important to know and understand, and I would say, Barbara, you had this experience, is that every venue is going to have different offerings and different creative solutions and different things that they can accommodate based on the makeup of their facility, and then also based on their staffing, and looking at conserving the integrity of their food and beverage. So their chef absolutely may have an opinion, right? And making sure that they're showcasing, their food product and what that looks like. So we had talked about some different solutions for food and beverage based on your venues. And one option that we looked at is, gosh, you had, I can't remember what you called it, Barbara, but this was, we were planning a reception at the Marriott, Dallas Plano. And what did you come up with for that name? It was very trendy. And
it's a theater box. So basically, I can talk a little bit about this. So we decided that the risk around cocktail receptions really comes from the drinking and the the kind of, you ease up on your guardrails, if you will. So we decided, and people, because they're eating, don't have their masks on. So what we decided we'd do is separate the food from the beverage in this case. So I have acquired through a company, I'm happy to share the info, masks that allow a straw in. So you can drink your cocktail while you have your mask on, never taking it off. We're going to serve all the cocktails in glasses, and they're going through a straw, whether that's a beer or wine. And at the end, when people depart, at the end of the reception, we're keeping it a little shorter, they can pick up their theater boxes. It's going to be a very elegant charcuterie and dessert. And they're making a special cocktail to go. People, if they choose to allow people into their circles, can bring those wherever they would like to enjoy them together, or to their rooms. Or if they're not comfortable doing that kind of thing, they can take them up to their rooms. They can, if they choose, sit together with a small circle right there. But it leaves the decision as to who to sit with the attendees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, food and beverage is definitely the biggest, I'll call it potentially even controversial thing to consider. And, I think that is a great solution. And, obviously giving people that choice to decide what their level of exposure is going to look like, and making sure that they're comfortable is, it's significant, because a lot, everybody's going to have different risk factors. And that was a great creative solution. The food and beverage process, the fact that, okay, if you can have a cocktail and have your straw, right, and that could work out great. Although I might drink a little too much wine if I have a straw in my wine, but that's okay. But then food, there's no real way about it, and it's a little challenging sometimes to kind of do the switch, and necessary, of course. But if you have the opportunity to take that and go to your room and relax and kind of decompress from the day, I think that's a great creative solution. And I've heard of a lot of organizations doing that, providing, kind of splitting the difference of, yes, okay, we're going to be in a meeting space. Now maybe we offer an in-room happy hour and we join on Zoom. It's still the same people, for example, but maybe we're getting together still, without our masks in our room, but we can still interact and network, and, love those creative solutions. And I think that when you're working with your venues, it's totally what it's all about, looking at your exact, specifications of how many people and how you're going to execute it, pretty significant and important. And I would love to talk a little bit about our exploration with the reception that we talked about for the Phoenix program, which I thought we came up with some really good solutions, in a different way, not necessarily doing a buffet style. But do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, are you talking about Mountain Shadows?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, that's a good example of, so on the second evening of this program, which will happen in September, we are taking the group to another resort, and we're going to use an outdoor space, but we still are going to have them have a seated a dinner. So one idea is to seat them all facing out at the view rather than seat them in a circle, which I really think is a good solution. And everything is going to be placed. All the food and beverage will be placed. So when they arrive, you know, we're combining a salad into an appetizer, and that will be at the table. And then the next course will be passed, drinks will be served, and they will be able in a kind of U configuration to see each other, but not directly facing each other, and outdoors, which is your safest way to go. But your plan B is the tricky part, because if weather doesn't cooperate, you don't exactly get what you know, what you had hoped for. So
Definitely. And making sure that everybody is appropriately spaced. And, you know, once again, you have to look at that space and how many people you have attending and will it actually work, you know, so working with your venue to provide diagrams on, okay, how can we keep people safe? And, you know, this was that situation where, you know, their chef wanted to make sure they're looking to promote their facility, you know, and you know, in partnership with Prevue, and making sure that, okay, if we're going to do preset food, we want to make sure that it is excellent, and of course it needs to be covered, right? And so doing kind of tray passed drinks, you know, I think is also a great solution, still also covered. And you know, the bar line is something that can potentially be challenging because people forget about distancing, and you know, it's not going to work for every, you know, venue or whatnot, or program. But we talked about not doing a bar to avoid that line and to avoid that kind of cross traffic and flow, and making sure that we're providing the most, you know, safe experience as possible. And that makes it just a little easier to execute. But then, of course, we've got to make sure that the hotel has the venue, or you know, the venue has the staff to facilitate that process. So yeah, all about creative solutions.
we have so many questions, so I think we probably the sooner the better we can get to some of them. That would be awesome. But I do want to add this in, because obviously if we're taking them off site, we're using transportation. Everybody is sitting there wondering how we're doing that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the conversation with the DMC?
Yeah, absolutely. So transportation, you know, can be a little bit tricky, and I'll say your protocols are only going to be as good as the people or person who are in charge of them and enforcing them. And so, working with your transportation company and your DMC to define what does that look like, and is there someone actually facilitating the process? And you know, in order to be in line with protocols would say that, okay, if you actually look at 6 feet of distance inside, you know, a bus or a motor coach, you're going to need quite a bit more of them in order to maintain. If you decide you're going to lax that policy a little bit, making sure that there's still significant space in between people, and that people understand as they come on board, you know, maybe there's someone there giving a little squirt of hand sanitizer just for good measure, right? And then reminding everybody that the masks do need to stay on, because now you're looking at a closer closed in space, you know, with additional people. And you might even take that a step further and look at, you know, your assigned seating and maybe assigned seats based on what, you know, what that looks like, loading, you know, back to front and then getting people off front to back, and being very orderly and methodical about the process is definitely in the best consideration.
And to ask them about their air purification, because just like
Yes.
you know, the airlines and facilities, buses are doing the same installation of HEPA filters to keep people safe. So
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many new technologies coming out. And so is there a sanitizing process in between, you know, uses of this, you know, if the same transportation vehicles are going to be used, you know, let's say over and over again, or on a, you know, a shuttle mode or something like that, what does that process in between look like? Is there an opportunity for additional sanitation and air purification and, you know, wiping things down? Definitely something to consider.
right, to treat them like you would like their airplanes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Hmm.
So where are we as far as that second poll? Do you think it's time?
Yes, I do. That actually is next. Yes, please.
Let's see what everybody here, I know that a lot of the meetings are planned for later this year. So we'd like to ask everyone if they've yet done an in-person site visit. Yes or no? Okay, let's see what we've got.
No,
Oh,
yeah.
still very early in the process. Only 17% have actually gone to do an in-person site.
Which completely makes sense and totally lines up with that first polling question that we did. And it's kind of a segue into our next section, which, we call venue protocol review. And if you are doing an in-person site, having that conversation is definitely something that should be included in this process, because of course you're looking on planning a well-executed meeting with COVID protocols. Starting with that site visit is going to be the first place to go, and making sure that you're comfortable with what that looks and feels like depending on your risk factors. And how is that venue going to approach that? That's a small scale, and now if you take it in a big scale. So I think that's really important to consider. How will a site visit be conducted? Is it more on a smaller scale, and or is it multiple people involved, and how are they going to facilitate that process? Let's go back to the elevator conversation, right? If you've got 6 people doing a site visit, are you all going up in the same elevator? And protocol would suggest that that's not the right solution, and kind of considering all of those different things. Are you going to dine together? Will you be maskless at any point together? And is that okay? Which is something that only you can answer. So also some really important considerations when we're looking at venue kind of like protocol review. You had mentioned, of course, looking at the hotel's clean policy, and everybody's got them, right? They're all done very nicely, and the industry has responded very quickly and very significantly with increased cleanliness policies, and now enhancing into the venue air purifications and whatnot. And I would also say, okay, this is fantastic. Love this for your big brand. And what does this translate to for your actual hotel specifically? Because one small hotel is going to run completely different than a big hotel, and the high touch point areas and registration areas and check-in and meeting space is going to be different depending on where you're at in convention centers, to that point. And so digging in a little bit deeper and asking some thoughtful questions on what that looks like. And then also this, will not necessarily come into play for, the meetings that Prevue is coming up, but what is the hotel's mask policy? We're seeing some interesting shifts happen, right, with some of our states. And is that going to be a problem because you at your meeting are going to require masking 100% of the time? And will your venue support that, So these are a little bit of a departure from questions that you and I have discussed for your meetings, but just kind of looking at our, COVID safety planning. How, if there is a screening process that the hotel is facilitating, and will that be in addition to your screening process as a meeting organizer? Great question. Those electric, I say it wrong every time, electric static, maybe I got that right, sprayers, right? And the air purifications, and really finding out what that looks like, and also the sanitization process. And so if you look at, okay, there's a meeting space that is sitting empty right now, but now you have a big meeting coming through it. What does that sanitation process and schedule look like? And you are the organizer, are you comfortable with it? Do you think it's enough, and or do you want to talk to your venue about increasing that, and kind of looking at your agenda? So if you say, okay, I've got all of my one-on-ones are happening here in this meeting at this time, when everybody's gone and done for the day, if they're coming back, or if there's a different group coming in, what is that room, what is the process that room is going to go through to make sure that it is safe for the following day, and or new attendees that are coming in? So
Exactly.
yeah. So that is just kind of just scratching the surface on venue protocol review, but there's, there's just a lot, there are a lot of questions right now. And I think that transparency with your venue on both sides is going to come into play significantly. And let's talk about maybe where our shortcomings might be as people start moving forward. Are they on reduced staff? Now they might have to have an attendant, for example, to serve your break. How can we work together to be creative and still execute a safe and awesome meeting, getting people interacting and together, but making sure that we're all just kind of like working together as a partnership,
And that's a good point about having enough people too. And we had the person who was in charge of MPI's November event in Dallas, and they relied on volunteers to enforce mask mandates because as the person who puts on the event, I'm not going to be the one to tell someone, including my own customer, to use, to put a mask back on. So you've got to make sure. And staffing wise, you just, depending on the number of people, might not necessarily need to use your own staff if you can rely on volunteers. It just depends on the kind of organization you are. Desi, do you want to do that one more poll and then move to questions?
I would love to. Yes, please.
So it is, again, just trying to feel the room because this is very important for your attendees who might not have worn a mask either. Have you worn a mask for an extended period of time yet to attend a live meeting or, for example, to travel on an airplane?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm curious to see. Okay, let's see.
So we've got 65% who have said yes. And one of the attendees mentioned that, we just do have a few hundred people on this call. No, we're not making a judgment as to whether this works across, this applies to the entire industry. It's really just for our own interest as a group here today. But it does show that more and more, I think if you had done that poll at the beginning of this year, it would have been entirely different. So we're
right.
moving. People are having more and more public experiences and realizing that it's doable as planners and attendees to spend the day in a mask.
Yeah, I want to touch real quick on what you said before that poll, which is so spot on. And I wanted that polling question in there because my, experience traveling for the first time with a mask, I'm home office. And so I hadn't really worn a mask except for just to go to the grocery store, or, something like that. And so that's maybe an hour, right? Whatever that looks like. And then when I had the opportunity to attend a meeting and, maybe be on an airplane, it was like, oh, goodness gracious, this is a little bit uncomfortable. And so being thoughtful about that with your attendees as you are considering what your protocols look like, I think is really significant. And, you had mentioned as a meeting organizer, you're not going to ask your customer or, badger them to put their masks on, right? And that is a potentially awkward situation for any meeting planner, and to decide who is going to have that job. And once again, going back to the beginning, to what lengths are you looking to enforce that? And knowing that it may potentially make some people uncomfortable, probably both the recipient and also the one who is, the protocol enforcer. So definitely being thoughtful about your approach there is significant. So I've got, of course, the last section, which is signage and communication, but do you want to do Q&A just to make sure we get some questions answered?
I think people are certainly familiar with the types of signage. You were very specific with the property, asking exactly what they had so we could figure out what we needed to go with. This is very different when you're talking about a convention center and a very large number of attendees.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we're offering you what we can offer you with our these particular experiences, but the hotel has been very willing. Have you had any experiences? This is one of the questions. How much can you ask your property, basically, this person is asking, to pay for? Now that includes additional signage, that includes additional staff for queuing. Where does the responsibility fall on the planner, and how much can you expect your property to do?
Yeah. So I'll say that I can't necessarily answer that on behalf of all of the venues, right? Because that's not necessarily a fair blanketed response. But this is where I would say looking into that partnership and finding out what they do have available, and planning for that in advance. And do they plan on procuring anything new and additional? And it'll also have to do with how many meetings have they executed, because they might not know what they don't know, and you might not know what you don't know in terms of what additions you're going to need. And so I would say, and also depending on the makeup of the property, if it's more, convention style versus resort. So I can't necessarily say here's what you should expect, but I would say let's have an open and honest conversation and understand what their inventory is and how you can work with their inventory, and then knowing what you're going to need to supplement. Basic signs, obviously. But if you are executing a really rigid protocol situation, I would not necessarily expect the venue to have all of the signs that maybe you're looking for. And something that you could consider, and I've got this in our COVID safety plan, is and it's kind of a silly thing, rope and stanchion. When would a hotel or venue, if it's maybe a smaller property or resort, need a ton of rope and stanchion? And the answer previously would be not very often, but that might not be something they have in their inventory yet. But when you're looking at kind of creating clean, measured out with your tape measure, both front and back, physically distant lines, people need structure and organization. And so when you're looking at supplementing something like that, so signage, rope and stanchion, and kind of things that help corral people in the way you want them to go. So not exactly an answer, but that's my philosophy there.
Yeah, you please do share your questions. We've got a few minutes left, and we'll see how many we can get to here. And Desi, are you willing to answer the ones we don't get to via email?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So here's a question about a meeting where they're like us doing assigned seating and plan to place the materials and name badges. Do you require anyone to show ID as a security measure to make sure that it's the correct person who's sitting there? I mean, in our case, they're going through the health screening, but that is a valid question.
It absolutely is. And I would ask, I think that that's part of your more holistic all hazards emergency response and safety plan. And I would say, do you typically ask for ID? And is that part of your process anyway and already? And I think it's a great idea, because you want to make sure that your people are credentialed appropriately. And that goes even down to, COVID aside, making sure that the right people are showing up to your event and controlling who is coming in, and making sure you know who those people are. So I, from a safety aspect, think that that's a wonderful idea.
Okay. This is a great question from Laura. She would love to volunteer and help at a conference so she can learn how it goes. For everyone on the call, if that's something you want, I'm happy to connect you to Laura. Laura, if you if you're in Dallas or Phoenix, I would love to work with you, but I wanted to put that out there. Let's talk about Desi, you have had a lot of experience attending, with different clients and attending a few meetings live so far. When do you, this is a more general question, expect meetings to increase? Are you seeing what we just saw in that poll as far as industry-wide, that by third and fourth quarter, it looked like 3/4 of the people on this call are planning to go live? Is that?
Yeah, I do see a lot of business happening in Q3 and Q4. And then there, of course, are organizations that are trying to figure out, can they move forward? Q1's almost done, but in Q2, and then what does that look like? And, kind of the biggest response that we're getting from the planning community is, I don't know how to do this, and I'm not even sure where to start. And so just to that Laura who just mentioned, wanting to have that experience, this, the community typically learns and responds to things that were not successful, right? Okay, that did not work, so here's how we're going to adjust. And a little bit of that is going to be coming into play for COVID protocols. But I think that really figuring out what your plan is before you get to that point, which is going to require a lot more time, unfortunately, and some more resources and thought-provoking questions to look through your, agenda. But I do see that business will pick up, and we'll see what the protocols look like, and as a community we'll respond and adjust accordingly. So when the mask mandate is no longer required, and then as the organization, do you still want to have a mask mandate because your risk tolerance says that you would require that enhancement? And so I think that you're going to see a little bit of that happening too in the future.
Okay, this is from Jenny. This is interesting. What if your leadership doesn't care about wearing masks, socially distancing, etc.? How do you suggest getting their buy-in?
So if your leadership doesn't care, I would ask, do your attendees care? Because we've all seen the social, functions, weddings, for example. We've seen all the pictures where everyone's raging and having a great party and nobody's wearing masks and that sort of thing. And, it's kind of a little bit of a catch-22, because on the one hand, we are in a pandemic and we want to be cautious about not spreading this, right? So that's what I would always default to. But are your attendees concerned? And if they're not, then that's another consideration. And if they are, then I would say, okay, what are the goals of the meeting? Is it revenue driving? Is it client facing? Is it education? And really tapping into what your attendees' concerns are, and then going from there. And they're the ones that have to deal with the risk and the potential issues that might come into play. So I think that is a conversation that will be ongoing.
Okay, so we have Jennifer, who asked, and I know we are using assigned seats. She asked if it really is a precaution. And the thinking behind our use of assigned seats is that you are in the same spot and there's no touching and there's no, potential spread by taking a new seat. But Desi, do you want to add a little bit more?
Yeah.
And that could apply to a dinner, or an F&B function as well. Do you assign? Or do you?
Absolutely. Right. And it's really, once again, up to you and what your kind of risk tolerance is. And I would say, once again, it's all about, the opportunity for spreading. And if you're looking at a meal versus assigned seatings for a meeting space, how many people are changing, into that space? If you are an organization who's going to be very focused on contact tracing and, depending on if you've got technology to support that process, now you know exactly where people were sitting and how much time they spent in that spot next to someone. So those are things that, could be helpful, but it once again is also, it's a lot to facilitate. And then there's also, I have a big asterisk on human behavior. Human behavior, and, going back to the, if they're not interested or not concerned, they're going to chat with each other and they're going to get in each other's space. Probably, because I'll tell you, to have a conversation from 6 feet apart with a mask on is a little challenging. And so looking at the things that are, okay, here are the protocols that we want to put in place, and we're trying to reduce this, the spread and this risk. And then also, here's how people are actually going to react on site. And so planning for what that experience is going to look like. But yeah, so I think that it is a precaution, and you can look at all of the precautions and decide what you can actually facilitate and execute, what's realistic for your group, and what your comfort level is.
Do you want to mention the key fobs?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we explore, and we're constantly keeping our eyes out for new technologies, and the innovation in the industry has been awesome. Right, Barbara had found these key fobs that will buzz when you get within 6 feet of someone else, which is pretty, I think that would just be a fun experience anyway, because people don't know, what 6 feet necessarily looks like. And so it could be a fun experiment to say, okay, here are these key fobs or these bracelets or an app or whatnot, and it kind of buzzes you if you're getting too close to someone, which I don't know, it's kind of a neat idea. Would be fun to watch that execute. And of course, like the innovation that the mask straws and that sort of thing, just looking at different ways that we can be together, you know.
Especially when you are drinking. I mean, it does come down to those barriers again. And we all understand when we're in a supermarket, we need to create that barrier. But there is something about introducing alcohol that changes the dynamic. I'm going to leave with we are at 2:00, but I just wanted to share this great idea from one of our attendees, Deborah. She said some meetings have sent out menu requests in advance to have pre-selected meals that are boxed for the attendees for breakfast and lunch. So just another terrific idea. There are many great ideas in Desi's white paper, which you can download right off your console. We'll also send you an attachment after the event. And I do have many questions. Desi, you have your homework cut out for you, but I will send the questions to her and she can reach out to you directly. So at this
and feel free to, I know you just posted the information in the chat, but if for some reason you're tech challenged, you can send me an email directly, dwhitney, WHITNEY at emergencyconcierge.net, and I'm happy to explore your questions.
So I'll take this opportunity to thank you, and I look forward to working with you in May and beyond. And thank you to everyone. We hope this helped you on your journey. We have a long way to go, but it's great to get started. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everybody. It's 2021 is exciting. There's a lot that will unfold, and I'm looking forward to meeting you actually in person, Barbara. So thank you for this opportunity.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye, everybody. Take care.